The night sky over Earth was supposed to be calm, peaceful, but tonight it was anything but. A billion eyes turned upward as darkness spread across the heavens, not from the setting sun, but from the arrival of something far worse. Massive alien warships, thousands of them, covered the sky like a second, unnatural night. They hung above cities, oceans, and mountains, casting long shadows over the terrified world below. People froze in the streets. Cars stopped in the middle of highways. News channels abandoned their broadcasts, switching to live footage of the impossible sight above. Governments scrambled to make contact, but there was no need. The aliens spoke first. A deep, inhuman voice echoed across every radio, television, and phone. It spoke in perfect English and in every other language known to man. People of Earth, we are the Zarkari Dominion. Your world now belongs to us. Surrender, and you will be spared. Resist, and you will be erased. The message repeated every 30 seconds, pounding into the ears of every human being. It left no room for doubt, no space for negotiation. This was not a first contact situation. This was an invasion. In the halls of power, world leaders tried to react. Some wanted to fight, others to negotiate. Some believed surrender was the only way to survive. But before any decision could be made, the first attack came. A single city, New Delhi, was erased in a flash of light. No explosion, no debris, just gone. A massive circular hole in the earth where millions of people had lived just moments ago. Panic spread like wildfire. Governments crumbled in the chaos. Civilians ran in every direction, but there was nowhere to go. The enemy was above them, watching, waiting. The Zarkari had done this before, to other planets, to other species. None had ever resisted them for long. But Earth was different. Deep beneath the surface, in hidden military bunkers and secret laboratories, humanity had been preparing. The warnings had come years ago. Strange signals from deep space, whispers of an approaching armada. The world's most powerful nations had put aside their differences just for this. Scientists, engineers, and strategists had worked in the shadows, creating weapons no one had ever seen before. And now, as alien warships hovered over Earth, those weapons came online. A scientist in a remote underground base flipped a switch, activating a defense grid hidden beneath the planet's surface. Around the world, ancient-looking satellites, long thought to be weather monitors, shifted their positions. Above the Pacific Ocean, a Zarkari battleship suddenly trembled. Its massive hull, reinforced with alloys stronger than steel, began to crack. Without warning, the entire ship vanished, pulled into nothingness. One moment, it was there. The next, only empty sky remained. The rest of the fleet hesitated. This was unexpected. Then another ship vanished, and another. Across the planet, the invaders watched in confusion as their most powerful warships simply ceased to exist. There were no explosions, no attacks they could detect, just an invisible force swallowing them whole. In the command center of the Zarkari flagship, Supreme Commander Krolvex narrowed his reptilian eyes. This was not how the invasion was supposed to go. This world was primitive. It should have been helpless. Yet something unseen, was fighting back. Deploy ground forces, he ordered, his voice low, dangerous. Hundreds of transport ships broke away from the main fleet, descending through the atmosphere in perfect formation. Inside, elite alien warriors prepared their weapons, their minds set on an easy victory. They landed in New York, London, Beijing, and dozens of other cities. Their orders were clear: crush all resistance, force the humans to their knees. The doors of the transports opened. The first wave of invaders stepped onto Earth, and then they began to disappear. Not killed, not attacked, just gone. Zarkari soldiers turned to their commanders, confused. No gunfire, no explosions, just the eerie silence of an empty battlefield. And then the screaming began. It wasn't the humans, it was them. Inside the transports, warriors howled in terror as something tore them away. Something unseen. Cameras flickered. Communications cut off. Soldiers who were inside the ships never came out again. Krolvex watched from orbit, his claws gripping the metal armrest of his command chair. This was wrong. This was all wrong. The humans should have been running, screaming, begging for mercy. Instead, his forces were vanishing into nothing. No bodies, no evidence, just gone. For the first time in his long military career, a thought crossed his mind that had never been there before. A feeling his kind had never associated with this weak, primitive species. Fear. You said. The war for Earth had begun, but it wasn't going the way the Zarkari had expected. From orbit, Supreme Commander Krolvex watched the invasion unfold on his command screens. His elite soldiers had landed in dozens of cities, prepared for easy conquest. Instead, they were disappearing. Not fighting, not resisting, just gone. The command feeds from his ground forces flickered with static. No gunfire, no explosions, just brief flashes of confusion before entire squads vanished from existence. His soldiers reported seeing shadows moving, shapes they couldn't describe. One moment, a warrior was standing next to them. The next, he was nowhere. Krolvex's claws tightened around the armrests of his throne-like command chair. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. No species had ever done this before. He turned to his tactical officer, a gray-skinned Zarkari named Vexroth. What is happening down there? Vexroth hesitated. He was scanning the battlefield, running every sensor they had. He didn't want to say it, but he had no choice. Commander, I don't know. That answer was unacceptable. Krolvex rose from his seat, towering over the officers on his bridge. His armored tail slammed against the metal floor. Deploy the Seekers. Now. The Seekers were the Dominion's finest hunters, special forces trained in eliminating resistance. They had conquered countless planets, breaking armies and slaughtering the most stubborn defenders. If anything was hiding in the shadows, the Seekers would find it. Or so Krolvex believed. The Zarkari Seekers moved with precision, their advanced armor blending into the environment. Their helmets scanned for heat signatures, movement, anything unusual. And yet, they saw nothing. The streets were too quiet. Buildings stood empty, abandoned vehicles littered the roads. The humans had fled. But where? The city was too large for them to simply disappear. A Seeker squad moved through the ruins of Times Square, their leader, Commander Zaltor, scanning every alley. The neon billboards above flickered eerily, casting strange shadows on the pavement. Then, a scream. Zaltor spun around. One of his soldiers was gone. His second in command, a warrior named Krekvash, was gripping at empty air, where his squadmate had been standing just seconds ago. His claws sliced at nothingness, his tail lashed in frustration. Zaltor activated his comms. Seeker command, we have. Static. His words were cut off. The transmission didn't just fail, it was erased, as if the signal had never existed. Then another soldier vanished. Zaltor saw it this time. There was no flash, no weapon, no attacker. His warrior simply blinked out of existence. And that's when the shadows began to move. Something was there, just beyond the edge of sight. Not invisible, but unseeable. The more Zaltor tried to focus on it, the more it slipped away, like his mind refused to process its shape. He raised his weapon, barking an order. And then the darkness swallowed him whole. Back on the Zarkari command ship, Krolvex could only watch in horror as his invasion force fell apart. The battle reports made no sense. No weapons fire, no resistance, no enemy. And then, a new reading appeared on the command screens. Commander, Vexroth whispered, his gray skin turning pale. Something is coming. Krolvex narrowed his eyes. What? Vexroth didn't have an answer. Because whatever was rising from beneath Earth's surface wasn't human. Krolvex watched in growing frustration as his invasion force collapsed. Reports from the ground were erratic. Troops disappearing, entire battalions going silent. The humans weren't fighting like any species he had encountered before. Vexroth, his tactical officer, was struggling to make sense of the readings. "Commander, something is wrong with our scanners. It's like the entire planet is interfering with our systems." Krolvex growled. "Impossible. Earth's technology is primitive compared to ours." But the evidence was undeniable. The battlefield feeds were scrambled, heat signatures flickered in and out, and the Zarkari troops were vanishing without a trace. "We have lost communication with over 70% of our ground forces," Vexroth admitted, his voice tight with fear. Krolvex slammed his fist against the control panel. "Deploy the war mechs. If the humans are hiding, we will flush them out." Across the Zarkari fleet, the order was relayed. The Titans, massive bipedal war machines armed with energy cannons, began their descent. The cityscapes of Earth trembled as the giant machines landed, crushing streets beneath their feet. Their scanners swept for any sign of movement. And then, for the first time since the invasion began, something answered. It started as a hum, a deep, resonant vibration that echoed through the air. The war mechs detected the anomaly, but couldn't pinpoint its source. The frequency grew, rattling the Titan's systems. Then came the first strike. A war mech near the ruins of Washington, D.C., collapsed in a shower of sparks. No explosion, no projectile, just failure. Its core flickered and died, as if something had ripped the power from its heart. The others barely had time to react before more began to fall. Across the world, the Titans were shutting down. Some collapsed where they stood, their circuits fried by an invisible force. Others were pulled into the darkness of underground tunnels, vanishing like the soldiers before them. In orbit, Krolvex's command chip trembled. Alarms blared. "Gravitational anomaly detected," Vexroth shouted. "Something is rising from Earth's surface." On the main screen, a new signature appeared. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything the Zarkari had ever encountered before. And it was coming for them. The command deck of the Zarkari flagship was in chaos. Alerts screamed across the consoles as officers struggled to make sense of the impossible readings flooding their displays. Krolvex stood rigid, his clawed hands gripping the railing as he stared at the holoscreen. The battlefield should have been his. The humans should have been broken by now. And yet, something was rising from Earth. "Vexroth," he growled, turning to his tactical officer. "Report." Vexroth's scales darkened with stress. "Commander, we don't know what it is. Whatever it is, it's massive. It doesn't match any known human weapon signature." The holoscreen flickered as new readings poured in. A deep, pulsing energy field was spreading across the planet's surface, reaching up toward the fleet. And then, ships started disappearing. The Zarkari invasion force, once 10,000 strong, was shrinking. Not being destroyed, not being shot down, just gone. Krolvex's throat tightened. "Where are they going?" "No idea, Commander," Vexroth admitted. His claws danced over the controls, but the ship refused to respond. "We are losing fleet members at an exponential rate. Every vessel that enters that field is simply..." He stopped. The screen showed one of their heaviest dreadnoughts, a massive warship armed with enough firepower to destroy a planet. The ship was caught in the field now, its engines flickering. The crew inside were sending frantic distress signals. And then, before their eyes, it folded in on itself. Not an explosion, not an implosion, just erased. Every Zarkari officer in the room went silent. Then the flagship shook violently. The bridge lights dimmed, flickering under some unseen force. Something had them. "Commander," Vexroth was shouting now. "It's here." The view screen showed nothing, just Earth below and the fading remains of their fleet. But deep down, Krolvex knew. They weren't alone anymore. The bridge of the Zarkari flagship was drowning in alarms. Officers shouted over each other, their voices filled with panic. The once mighty fleet was vanishing before their eyes, swallowed by something they couldn't see, couldn't fight, couldn't even understand. Krolvex's claws dug into the metal railing. His mind refused to accept what was happening. The invasion of Earth was supposed to be a glorious conquest. Humanity should have been on its knees by now. Instead, his fleet was being erased. A deep, unnatural hum vibrated through the ship. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't from their systems. It was something else. Find the source. Krolvex barked. Vexroth, his tactical officer, frantically worked the controls. His scaled fingers moved fast, pulling every scan, every sensor readout, every possible explanation. But nothing made sense. Then, the main view screen flickered. A signal was coming through. Not a distress call, not a human broadcast. Something older, something vast. And then, for the first time in his life, Krolvex felt true fear. Because the screen did not show a human face. It did not show a weapon or a fleet. It showed a shape, shifting, formless, ancient. It spoke without words, a voice that echoed inside his mind, making his scales crawl. You should not have come. The ship lurched violently. The crew screamed as gravity twisted. Systems shut down one by one, as if something was peeling the ship apart from the inside. Krolvex gritted his teeth. What is this? Vexroth looked up, his eyes wide with something no Zarkari should ever feel. Pure terror. Commander, it's not the humans. His voice was barely a whisper. It's Earth itself. Krolvex's blood ran cold. This was no war. This was a warning. The flagship shuddered violently, alarms blaring as the crew struggled to keep the ship intact. Krolvex gripped the command railing, his claws digging deep into the metal. The energy readings were impossible, off the charts, unexplainable, unnatural. Report, he roared, forcing his voice to stay firm. Vexroth, his tactical officer, barely turned. His eyes were wide, unfocused. Commander, we need to run. Krolvex bared his fangs. We do not run from primitive species. This isn't them. Vexroth's voice trembled. The humans. They are not alone. The ship lurched again, metal screaming as something pressed against reality itself. The view screen flickered. And for a moment, just a moment, they saw it. A presence. A force older than their empire. Not human. Not a machine. Something else. The air grew heavy, like an unseen weight was pressing down on them. The crew collapsed, gasping for breath. Lights flickered, and the ship's systems failed one by one. Not destroyed, not attacked, but drained. Krolvex's vision blurred as a voice filled the ship, though no mouth spoke it. Leave. The word was not a threat. It was a command. Krolvex turned to his crew, ready to order a counterattack, but his officers were on their knees, shaking. Vexroth stared at the screen in horror. Commander, the fleet. It's already gone. Krolvex looked at the monitors. 9,000 ships had entered Earth's orbit. Less than 100 remained. No wreckage, no debris, no escape pods. They had been erased. A cold, terrible truth settled over him. This was no battle. They had trespassed where they were never meant to go. Full retreat, Krolvex whispered, his voice hollow. No one argued. The once mighty invasion fleet turned, fleeing into the void. And behind them, Earth watched. The Earth was scared, but it still stood. Cities had turned to rubble, and the sky bore the remnants of battles that had shaken the heavens. Yet, the spirit of humanity burned brighter than ever. The aliens have thrown everything they had minus 10,000 warships, entire battalions of elite warriors, and weapons meant to break planets. But Earth refused to fall. The last remnants of the alien armada hovered above the planet, their numbers a fraction of what they had been. Their once mighty warships now floated as twisted wrecks, their captains afraid to approach. The message had been clear. Humanity was not to be conquered. General Carter stood on the bridge of the Resolute, Earth's last remaining supercarrier. His uniform was torn, his face bore the marks of countless battles, but his eyes still held the fire of defiance. The war had taken everything from him: friends, family, and a world that would never be the same. But there was no room for sorrow. Only the fight remained. "Status report," Carter ordered, his voice steady. "Enemy fleet is holding position." Lieutenant Park responded. "They've lost their will to fight, but they're too afraid to retreat." Carter exhaled slowly. The aliens had come expecting an easy victory. Instead, they had found something else. "They're waiting for reinforcements," said Admiral Patel, his voice grim. "They won't leave until they know we're finished." Carter turned to his communications officer. "Get me a channel to their flagship." A moment later, the holographic form of Supreme Commander Vakir flickered into view. The alien leader's golden armor was dented, his once proud gaze filled with hesitation. "You should surrender," Vakir said, though his voice lacked confidence. "Your planet is broken. Your people are dying. There is no future for you." Carter stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "We didn't fight to survive, Vakir. We fought to teach you a lesson. We fought to show you that no matter how many ships you send, no matter how strong you think you are, you will never own us." Vakir's mandibles clicked in frustration. "You think you've won? This was only the first wave. Our empire will never set foot on Earth again," Carter interrupted. He gestured to the sky behind him. "Your people know it. The ones still alive. They'll tell the others what happened here. They'll whisper our name in fear. And you'll be the commander who lost everything to a species you thought was weak." The alien's gaze darkened, but there was something else in his eyes now: doubt. "You have one chance," Carter continued. "Leave now. Take your ships, your wounded, your dead, and run. Because if you ever return, if you so much as send a single drone back to our system, we won't just defend ourselves. We will come for you, and we will finish what you started." For a long moment, Vakir said nothing. Then, slowly, his image flickered out. The bridge was silent. Then, Lieutenant Park gasped. "They're retreating," she whispered. One by one, the remaining alien warships turned away from Earth. Like shadows fleeing the rising sun, they vanished into the void, leaving behind only silence. The war was over. Humanity had won. But Carter knew this was just the beginning. The galaxy had learned of Earth, and now it would never forget.